Hello, welcome. I've got a very special guest with me today. We've got Bart from Bart's Bookspace. Welcome.
Thank you, Robin, for having me. I'm very much excited about this book and this conversation we're going to have. It was a fabulous, interesting buddy read. So thank you for inviting me to the buddy read and to this conversation.
Welcome. So the book that we are going to talk about today is Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. This is my copy here.
I got 2 copies.
Oh, you've got 2 copies. Is that a hardback on the...
I have a nice hardback with a signed hardback that has a nice kind of appropriate cover, of course, with the clouds, but also when you take this off, it's got very interesting cover with the characters kind of blending into each other, which is a theme of the book in itself, maybe reincarnation, which, we'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, interesting cover, and it is a signed copy. I got this actually for my wife for Christmas. And then I picked this one up just to read a cheap copy, a used copy for a couple of bucks.
Fantastic. So I've not seen that special edition before. Is that, who's the publisher? Do you know?
So this is a 20th anniversary edition. So the book came out in 2004. So this came out 2024. And the publisher is Random House. So it's one of the big boys, but it's a nice one.
Very fancy. Nice. I think this one I've got here, I got this one. Interesting signature.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got this quite recently, actually. Is in a book auction, actually. My local theft group. It's a secondhand copy. I got this for £2. I think it's like the original, paperback UK release.
Isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing that we can get, for a couple of dollars, we can get such an interesting work of art that we can then experience? It's really a steal if you think about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is quite a special book. This is a unique book.
I agree.
And I'm glad that I got to read this together with you as a buddy read. I think there's a lot we could talk about here. So I think I'd just like to open by saying, I think this book is unique in a number of ways. And I think it has genuine cross-genre appeal, which is quite rare, I think, because this book certainly fits the mold of science fiction, no doubt about that. But it's also very much a piece of literary fiction. It was shortlisted for the Booker, but it was also nominated for the Clark and the Nebula Awards for Best SF Novel. I don't think it won any of those awards, but I think is quite an unusual example of a book that genuinely has critical acclaim in both literary fiction and science fiction.
Yeah, it's definitely a genre-bending book, but in a quite unique way also. I don't know if I think, in fact, I do know I never read anything like this.
Right.
Which in itself is impressive.
So this book has a very unique structure, which is one of its most famous aspects, which we'll get onto in a minute. It's also, I'd say it is quite widely acclaimed, perhaps David Mitchell's best-known work. Mm-hmm. A little bit divisive, maybe. It does have a healthy Goodreads average rating of 4.01.
Okay.
But some people didn't really like it. So I was looking at my 6 friends on Goodreads who had reviewed it or rated it. And among those, 4 people gave it 5 stars. 2 people gave it 1 star, and the other person gave it 2 stars. So there's quite a big disparity in opinion there.
Yeah, that actually makes sense to me. I don't think this is a 3-star kind of book. You either love it because of its uniqueness and you get what the author was trying, I think, to do, and it comes together for you, or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, it could be a frustrating reading experience also, because it is quite difficult for several reasons. One of them being this structure that you've already mentioned, is that we haven't talked about, but this interrupted narrative style.
Okay, so let's spell it out, shall we? If you don't know already. So this novel is basically composed of 6 narratives, 6 novellas, if you like. 6 distinct stories, each with their own character and their own story arc, set within different periods of time, But it's not just 6 stories. The way they are presented is quite unusual. But do you want to explain how the stories unfold?
Sure. So it's got the structure 1, 6, and then 6 to 1, meaning it goes, we read the first story, second, third, fourth, fifth, and all of those stories end in the middle. The first story ends abruptly mid-sentence. So once we've gotten to story number 6, that story is the kind of the connector, and that story we read through from beginning all the way till the end. A fascinating story, and then we go back to story number 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that's an unusual framing, and it does add a little bit to the challenge, but it's not the only thing that's challenging about this book.
Yes. So that's the first unusual thing about it.
Yeah. Have you read
But
any book that has that have that kind of structure? Can you think of any?
certainly nothing that like that particular structure. I mean, I've read books which have separate narratives that span huge periods of time.
Sure.
We both read A Canticle for Leibowitz, of course, which, we've got that's basically 3 separate novellas over huge periods of time with different characters in each one. But this takes this whole structure to a whole new level.
Yeah. I was thinking about this. Sorry to jump in, Robin.
Go ahead.
I think if you have this kind of a storytelling device that he's using, it helps to connect all of them in a very meaningful way. Because if he forgoes that and just writes each story beginning till end, story 1, then it feels like you're reading essentially a book of short stories that are maybe loosely connected, but you wouldn't have this feeling of one cohesive storyline. So I think it was ingenious to do that, even though this interruptive narrative style and having to go back to a story that you've read maybe a week earlier, while you've read so many other varied stories, because each one is so unique. Also, it's not just that they're different from one another as they could be. So yeah, I don't think he could have written them any other way, really, and have the same power.
Absolutely. And yeah, so not only are the individual stories and characters different from one another, but as you've kind of alluded to, they are very different in style and tone and genre even. So we have historical fiction, we have epistolary fiction, like in the form of letters or journal entries. But we also have some stories are quite humorous. We have futuristic stories, we have dystopian, we have post-apocalyptic.
Yeah.
It's all there.
Yeah.
And
We have a thriller.
We've got a thriller. Yeah. Each story is narrated in its own unique way. And personally, I think this is a great showcase of David Mitchell's talent, his versatility to write in different styles, because each different style he writes in it feels authentic.
Yes.
So like, we'll talk about the individual stories in a minute, but it opens off with a kind of Victorian 19th century journal, and it feels authentic, like something someone has written from that era.
Yeah, it feels like you're reading Melville or someone
who
was writing at the time.
Yeah. So that was quite impressive. But on the other hand, I can see why some people might find this frustrating, because it is kind of, because, as Bart has said, each story finishes in the middle. Well, the first 5 stories finish in the middle, and then they conclude the second half later on in the book. And so if you've been reading a lot in the meantime, this book, other book, different stories, different characters, you need to tolerate a kind of delayed gratification, right? And if you read this book slowly, it might have been a long time since you read the last part of the story. So you might have forgotten some of the characters of what's going on. I think I'm not saying this is necessarily a criticism, but I can see why people might find this frustrating, because it is quite a lengthy book, and you have to be prepared for that structure.
Yeah, and it feels also like not only the interruption, and then you have to kind of hold a lot in your memory and connect things in between the stories, but also the fact that, as you alluded to, that each one reads so differently because the first story and the sixth story, the language being used could not be any different. So you're going bouncing from these stories that have just a completely different tone and language. We go from that Victorian kind of an elevated, very proper way of speaking in story one to a Hawaiian pidgin. Who knows? It took me probably a good 10 pages of reading that sixth story to start to understand what is being said in a kind of a fluid way. Prior to that, I was rereading the same page over and over. It would take me 6, maybe 8 minutes for one page because I wanted to understand what's going on. And it wasn't easy for me, especially English not being my first language. Maybe you had a little bit more of an easier time understand, but but then when it clicked for me, it was like unlocking, a superpower. I could just read it and I knew exactly, what a babbit is or whatever, the word he comes up with. And it was ingenious, but it is difficult to bounce within one book between these such different ways of styles of writing and speaking and diction and syntax and everything thrown upside down. So fascinating experience,
Yeah.
but could be frustrating also.
So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to, if for people watching this who are not familiar with this book, you might be wondering what on earth is this story actually about. We've talked a lot about the structure and things like that. Yeah. So I think we'll go into the stories, the 6 stories. We're not going to go into a huge depth here. I'm going to try and keep it fairly spoiler free, and then perhaps once we've done that, we can examine what unites these 6 stories. How are they connected? Because it's not immediately obvious.
Yeah.
So I've already mentioned briefly the first story, which is chronologically, it's the furthest back in time, mid-19th century. In fact, each story is set slightly further into the future at a different time period. So perhaps, Bart, perhaps you can kick us off with the first story, which is called The Pacific Journal of Adam Ewing. Briefly, what is this story about and what did you think of it?
Yep. So this, as you've already said, is the Victorian era story. I believe 1850s, no later than 1850s. And we have a young man, maybe in his early 30s, a notary, who is traveling on a ship. So it's a maritime also adventure. And on the ship, he encounters, earlier on, he encounters a slave and a doctor during a voyage in the Pacific. It's a story that took me a little bit of time to appreciate. And I think, honestly, I didn't fall in love with this story until I read it again as the ending to the book. So this story of the journey proved to be incredibly impactful and profound. And I'm not no spoilers in this video at this point, for sure. So I'm not gonna talk about the ending. But all the conversations that were being had about colonialism, slavery, it was really well written, hard hitting. There are people who are of its time, and I think it was handled beautifully. There is, I don't know, but it also proved to be a great adventure with a slave, runaway slave, a stowaway. There was so much to latch on: human greed with a certain character. Yeah, it was a story that was kind of a slow burn in the beginning. And then it really became, I'll spoil it here. I kind of like different things about different aspects of just about every one of these stories. But when I finished the book, I was surprised by how much I like this maritime Pacific adventure. Yeah, so I liked it a lot.
I agree. I think it gets better. It's like for the first few pages when you're starting off the novel, you're kind of thinking, what is this? Where is this book going? I mean, I can only imagine if you went into this book blind, not knowing about its structure or, what it's attempting to do, you think, I've got 500 pages of this Victorian sailor's diary. I mean, I don't know if I can tolerate that.
Yeah.
But I think, yes, the ending, without spoiling anything, I think is quite satisfying. And it's quite a fitting end for the novel as a whole, because the way it kind of closes some of the recurring themes that we come across.
Yeah, and it
which was
becomes gripping also. At least I was gripped by the action and what's going to happen to our protagonist in this story. Adam Ewing is the name of the notary who's writing these. So this is written in journal entry kind of a form, so we get it directly from him. Yeah, it was a good story and interesting. Like you said, if someone doesn't know and thinks this is a science fiction book, well, this first one is definitely a rude awakening, and yep, just a beautiful historical novel about places also that aren't often written about. Tahiti, in the 1800s. I don't know if I've read a whole lot about the life. There's the colonists who are some kind of a religious, I don't know if they're Catholic or Protestant religious group on one of the islands. Very interesting conversations. Yep, and well written for sure.
certainly, yeah. So that's the story we open up with, and then we move on to, as I think you may have mentioned already, but this story cuts off mid sentence
That's right.
during one of his journal entries, and then we go straight into the second novella, which is titled "Letters from Zedelgem." I hope I'm pronouncing that right. This moves forward to the 1930s, and as the title suggests, this is in the form of letters. So what we have in this story is we've got this kind of struggling young musician. I think his name is Robert Frobisher from England, right?
That's right.
He goes off to the continent to try and make a living. Specifically, he gets in touch with this famous aging composer. I think it's in Belgium, I think.
Belgium.
Yeah. To become his amanuensis, his ghostwriter, in effect.
Mm-hmm.
And so this story, this section of the book is made up of the letters that he sends home to his lover, who is called Sixsmith, and his struggles and his pursuits and how he gets on in this composer's mansion. And yeah, it's quite a different style, but again, it also feels quite authentic. It feels like the genuine thing. It feels like this could have been written by someone in the 30s. What did you think of this one, Bart?
So I really enjoyed this one. I spoke with Sam about this book because it's one of his favorite books. I don't know if you know Sam from Sam Not So Wise channel. He loves this book, and he's also a musician. So I was looking out for how musical this section was, how lyrical, and it was very, very affecting. Especially again, the second part of the story kind of became uh, became more dramatic, and I really enjoyed how it concludes. Here we also get he's writing these letters to Sixsmith, his former lover. I guess he's bisexual. We would
Yeah.
say the protagonist, but also he finds the journals or half of the journal from Adam Ewing, his travels in the Pacific. So we immediately get that connection, and there's a bit of a we start to see a bit of an overlap with these stories. So yeah, I liked it. Probably not my favorite, but I thought it was again well written, and like you said, it really felt authentic to that in between the two great wars era in Europe. It was well done.
Yeah, and I also thought that the characters in this section were quite compelling and quite believable. Frobisher himself, I forget the name of the composer now,
I don't
but there's
remember.
basically three main characters: him and his wife, and
Yeah.
they. Well, I won't spoil anything, but there's a kind of the relationship between them is a bit complicated.
Yep.
So that's the second story. So the third story, it takes a huge tonal shift,
Oh yeah,
and this
for
one
sure,
is
for sure.
called Half-Lives: The First Louisa Ray Mystery. So what is this about?
So here we get a journalist. Louisa Ray is the journalist. This takes place in the 1970s, and she is investigating a conspiracy involving a nuclear power plant. And it's just a very fast-paced kind of action thriller, kind of a sub Grisham, I would say. Also, like it feels like someone else is writing the story. It's definitely feels like just an action flick, and the tone is completely different, but I found it to be fun, a good change of pace, unexpected, and yeah, I enjoyed it again.
Yeah. And this one has like mini chapters, lots of short
Yeah,
chapters, lots of action and intrigue, lots of danger. It's quite exciting. And it is basically a thriller.
yeah,
And I'm going to come back onto that point with the next story because I think it's relevant. But we can see how this story connects to the second story because I mentioned the character of Sixsmith,
yep,
who was that guy's lover. Sixsmith is one of the characters in this story as an older man who is basically the whistleblower or a whistleblower for because basically the power plant they're up to no good,
yeah.
right? They're very corrupt. So yeah, this one, change of tone, change of pace, very exciting. And this is one of the stories when it ends on a cliffhanger.
Yeah,
And
big one.
I thought I was a little bit impatient to finish the story.
Yeah, but I
Yeah,
think he was really channeling all these authors who write these types of stories, and he did such a good job. It's it almost feels like it's a farce because David Mitchell is such a great author, and he's kind of holding back and just doing this kind of a typical action book with all the hooks and and explosions and big stuff. And it was interesting to read. I found it fun, but it read well. It was a nice change of pace after the first two stories, which were a lot slower. So it was quite interesting. I liked it, but it was, and again, it shows his versatility that he can do that. That
yeah.
he can step away, pull back, and just okay, with this we're gonna write in a completely different fashion. Fascinating.
But once again, we have a clear link between the two stories because in this case, the protagonist, who is this investigative journalist, she is handed the letters from Frobisher, the letters that which we have just been reading in the previous story, so which have belonged to Sixsmith, right?
Yep.
So once again, there's a connection that, and then we move on to the fourth story, which is called The Ghastly Ordeal of Timothy Cavendish. Now, you might guess from this title that this one has quite a humorous tone, and you'd be right.
Yep.
This story is set, as I understand it, kind of in the present day or early 2000s, I think, when this book was written. And in this story, we have kind of an aging book publisher, Timothy Cavendish. He gets into, without going into a lot of detail here, but he gets into a bit of trouble with some rather shady folk, and through various circumstances finds himself incarcerated in a nursing home against his will. And this story is essentially him seeking a way to escape from the nursing home. What do you think of this one, Bart?
I found it funny. I thought it was written well. The writing was just a lot of fun to read. So I enjoyed it. I laughed out loud a couple of times. He was kind of a likable, but also he wasn't just a nice guy. There was some nuance to his character also that made it even more interesting. The way he deals with people, what he learns along the way, also how he kind of cooperates with folks in the nursing home to break out. It was again a bit of a curveball, out of left field, as we say, and unexpected kind of a story here, and a nice light touch before what comes next, I would say. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun to read.
Yeah, it is fun. And interestingly, I think this story is where the book really shows what it's trying to do, in a sense, in a sense of, because this is essentially a metafictional novel. And I think this really gets revealed in this fourth story because I've been mentioning in each story now how they're linked to the previous stories. But in this story, this guy, the book publisher, he receives a manuscript which is titled The First Louis Array Mystery, which is the name of the previous story. This is a manuscript that he's been reading for a novel, basically, which kind of confused things a little bit because it implies that the last story was fiction, and by extension, everything that came before it must be fictional.
I didn't
If
know
this
about
is
that.
the manuscript for a novel, right? So I don't know if I'm
Unless,
thinking about this too much, but it did get me thinking. How much of
yeah,
it is supposed to be real?
yeah, unless it's a kind of a historical fiction, which then we could presume that the previous three stories actually did take place, and they're not fictionalized. But yeah, it's an interesting. I guess I didn't think about that as I was reading
Yeah.
it. What that means.
And then we enter the fifth story, which, as Bart has already said, the tone, we've got another radical tone shift. Perhaps you'd like to explain what. Oh, so the fifth story is called An Orison of Somni. So what is this about?
So Orison of Sonmi 451, which I can no spoiler here. I don't think this is a spoiler, but Sonmi 451 is a clone. There are other Sonmis. Presumably, she's not the last one. So there's 452, and it goes on. So she's a clone, and she's what they call a fabricant in a kind of a dystopian future, South Korea or Korea. Who knows? Maybe it's one Korea at that point. But it's definitely a dystopian vision of a future Korea. And here I don't think, or at least I don't know how far in the future it is. It's a future I think that we can foresee. So maybe 100 years. I didn't pick up too many things that would be, kind of it's not much more than that, I think. And so we have this cloned fabricant, Sonmi, who is living in this dystopian South Korea and tells her story essentially of her story of, I don't know, gaining consciousness and realizing what is being done to the fabricants and what this society is really like, what humanity has become. And it gets very dark and heavy, and it's got a lot of interesting social commentary. It's different form again because now here she's being interviewed by someone, so there's a back and forth kind of so again a completely different feel, shift in tone, major shift in tone from the previous story, and reads a little bit like maybe Huxley, Orwell. It really is affecting.
Yeah, and
What
this
did
is
you?
this is the first kind of true sci-fi story we get, and yeah, it is a thoroughly grim dystopian vision in this one. And just to add a bit of context, I don't think this is really a spoiler, but she's basically a fast food worker. So we've got these like fast food corporations in Korea that have these cloned workers who, they it's a thoroughly grim exist. They're basically slaves, right? They're
Yeah,
a slave class, and as you said, she awakens, she gets involved in a resistance movement. I won't say any more than that. So it's kind of like a dystopian thriller, I would say. The first part of the story is more about setting up the world building, and then once she starts sort of getting involved in the resistance, that's when it takes on a more of a sort of thriller aspect. So yes, I must admit this story I struggled with to start with. I couldn't really connect with any of the characters, but I think as I progressed through, especially into the second half of the story, I kind of appreciated it more, and I think I was quite impressed with the ultimate outcome of the story.
yeah, yeah. I'll just jump in with that and say that I felt similarly. It was a story that I didn't maybe love or enjoy reading as much of dystopian novels. The Road, all of these post-apocalyptic or dystopian novels are usually difficult to read. They're not fun necessarily, so I don't look for that. But when I was just checking out my highlighted sections, I think I highlighted more passages from this uh, fifth story than from any other. There was a lot of interesting things that were said in there, and it was very philosophical. And here Mitchell, I think, takes his time and really says a lot about like I said, a lot of social commentary.
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the reasons maybe I struggled a little bit with it was I found it hard to connect with
Yeah,
most of the characters, whereas I think some of the characters from the other stories are a little more sympathetic.
Yeah, I feel the
But
same.
he certainly put quite a bit of thought into the world building into this one, which brings me on to the middle section, the sixth story, which, as we've already discussed, is the only story which is there's no break in the middle. And so it's the middle part of the book, and it's called Sluices Crossing and Everything After. So this one is further into the future. I don't know how far into the future this one is, but
Yeah, I read somewhere that it's 24 something, but then I read there's a New York Times review also that I kind of briefly looked through, and there it said that this story spans 1,000 years, which would put the last story further.
okay.
But it's far in the future.
So as Bart mentioned earlier on, this is set on Hawaii, a post-apocalyptic Hawaii. It's a first-person narrative. It's not in any kind of unusual form. It's just a straight-up narrative. Well, okay, I take that back. The way in which it's written is a bit unusual because it's presented in this kind of weird dialect. Basically,
Yeah.
it's that the English has kind of degenerated into this unusual way of speaking, which is quite difficult to comprehend. It takes a bit of. This is not a book you could. This is not a story you can rush through. I found myself constantly rereading sections and trying to read between the lines and try and understand what people were saying. So, perhaps, can you explain what is going on in this section?
Okay, well, so first of all, to alluding, because I'm thinking about what you were just saying about the writing, and I talked about that in the beginning just a bit, but all these stories have, I guess, something that's called polyphonic writing, where the author really takes care to put himself into the time when the story is being told, and we get a story that sounds like someone writing at that time would have written it. So obviously, in some ways, it's easier to go back in time to a historical period, maybe the Pacific story, and get that done. But here with this story, I almost feel that David Mitchell must have taken a lot of care to think about what changes would happen to a language in a society that has kind of fallen apart. We have language it's a living thing. It changes, it evolves, devolves quite often, as we're seeing. Words get shorter, and he really did an interesting job of crafting this polyphonic way of speaking in the future, and I thought that was very interesting. So that is fascinating. It also took me a while to get used to it. Once I got used to it, I was excited that I was understanding this language so easily. But it did take a bit of time, and it's a post-apocalyptic Hawaii. Our protagonist is a herder, goat herder,
Yeah.
and but I don't think this is a major spoiler because it sets up the whole story. So these people live very kind of tribal way of living without any technology, and no high tech remains, but they do get visited from time to time by humans who have technology, who have the ability to travel, to fly, and visit them, to barter things. And they kind of, it feels like they're checking in almost with these people on the island. And interesting fact, all the people who have the technology, they're all black. So that's an interesting tidbit of information as well. And in this story, we get one of the people who visit. I forget the name of her. I don't know if you
Uh,
recall.
Meridim,
Yeah,
is it?
I
Yeah.
think so. So she stays on the island, and then there's a bit of a quest that they have together. And often, as we get these stories of a world that is falling apart, it starts to feel a little bit like a fantasy. They have a quest. They go. There is some horror element to it, also some visions that maybe our protagonist has. And we again have a connection with the previous story, Son Me 451, as well. I don't know if we should reveal what that is, but
I don't think it's a major spoiler.
yeah.
I mean,
So
since
she's
we have
basically
been
a
talking.
godlike figure for the people in the future, I suppose, because of what she becomes during, how important and what kind of figure she becomes during the dystopian tale in this post-apocalyptic world. She is kind of a sign of hope. They pray to her, and yeah. So very interesting world building. I thought interesting villains in this story, and I thought we talked a little bit about off air about the movie also, and this was an interesting portrayal of this story in the movie was
Okay.
done
Yeah.
interestingly as well.
I'm going to mention the movie in a minute because we have
Okay.
both watched it and I've got thoughts about it. But
Yeah, of course.
I just wanted to say before we go on to that, yes, this was a very interesting story, and I think kudos to David Mitchell for creating this whole new dialect from scratch and in quite a convincing way. This kind of form of English that people speak, and it's true, it's a struggle at first, but once you get used to it, it does become easier to understand. Even if there are bits of it where I'm kind of guessing what they're saying, it's written in a first person narrative. So he could have made a very different sort of literary choice. He could have just narrated it in just like normal modern English and just kept the dialogue in that form. I'm sure I've read someone online who's kind of making the case that he perhaps that would have been better, but I think it's an accomplishment. I enjoyed this story actually. This is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
So yes, this lady Merinum is from a more technologically advanced society than the one the main guy is from. I think they're called the Prescients.
The price.
And there's a lot going on in the world building here which we don't really know about, but it's interesting to speculate about. So we mentioned that Sonmi is a kind of deity, but we don't ultimately know what happened to Sonmi. I forget her number now, but in the last story, 451. Ah, maybe that's quite fitting, isn't it? Yeah, Somni 451. What was the result of her cause? As a revolutionary, we don't, and that clearly that at this point in the story, that's sometime in the past. All we know now is that she is a kind of deity for these people who live on this island. And by the way, some of the horror is pretty horrific in this section. We've got a tribe of cannibals. Anyway, I really enjoyed the story. So I would like to mention the film in just a second. But before we do, I just would like to ask you, Bart, among these 6 stories, do you have a particular favorite?
So I was thinking about that, and I will say that I like all of the stories. I think the one that is most memorable is the 6th story, because of the reading experience, the language used, and this future vision of this dying world. I thought it was very interesting. Early on, I thought, how am I going to get through this? And then I kind of fell in love with it. But I would say they all work because together. I'm not sure if I read just one of them alone. I don't know if, as a story, if that would be satisfying. I do think there's something greater. It's definitely a case where they do need to be read together, and as they come together and form this cohesive narrative and loop back on itself, with the first story being also the last story that you read. I think so. Ultimately, I think together they form something that is maybe more than the sum of its parts, even.
Right.
But if I had to pick one, it would be the 6th one.
Okay, I think we're probably in agreement with that.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I think I enjoyed every story. There were some parts which maybe felt like a bit of a slog,
Yeah.
but I don't mean that in a particularly bad way. So, like I've already mentioned, it took me a little while to get into the 5th story because I couldn't relate to any of the characters, and it's quite a grim story. The first Victorian episode, it took me a few pages before I really got into it, but on the whole, I was pretty compelled throughout the whole novel. Now, one thing, I'd like to just discuss the film briefly in a minute. But before we do, I'd like us to examine this question, like what unites these 6 stories together? Because they are on the surface very different, as we've been talking about. different characters, different time periods, and different styles of writing, different genres of writing. Now, we have mentioned already that each protagonist, in a sense, discovers the text in a previous story through one way or another, kind of. I mean, you could debate the point about Somni, but
Yeah, somebody watches, I think, a movie, right, from the
actually, I
previous.
don't think we mentioned that, do we? Yeah, she
Yeah,
watches a movie
yeah,
of the the events which happened with Timothy
Cavan.
Cavendish. Yeah. So yeah, they that the stories are all connected in that way. But I'd also like to discuss the theme or themes, how they all connect. And there's one more point. First of all, the theme. So I think these stories all share an overarching theme. But before I say what that is, I'm going to ask Bart, what do you think? Do you think they're united in a particular way?
Yeah, so they did come together very well for me. I think there are lots of themes throughout the book. There's faith, themes of faith, definitely reincarnation. I think is definitely a major theme. Also, kind of just these ripple effects of our actions that ripple across time, and I thought that was done really, really well. Yeah, the things that go beyond the person is no longer alive, but the ripples continue. So those were things that kind of stood out to me, and each story itself had its own kind of themes, and each one was different and rich, but overarching themes. I think this ripple across time was something that I thought of. What about you?
Yes, and I was going to make a point about how each story has some kind of conflict with a stronger the strong sort of or the weak fighting back against the strong,
Yeah.
basically, or exploitation, if you like. In fact, the term that Mitchell uses, and I looked this up, is predacity, the way that people prey on one another.
Mhm.
And you can see this throughout every single story. I won't go through all of them, but just take for the first story, for example, we have this this stowaway, runaway slave from the Chatham Islands who gets exploited by the Maori colonizers of that island, which has got a fascinating sort of history in its own right, which gets discussed
Yeah.
about. But then he gets exploited along with the Maori, the indigenous peoples who are exploited by the white colonists themselves, and that's just one example. There are actually many other layers which I won't talk about because it actually is a spoiler, really. But throughout each stories, we've got a recurring theme of exploitation, but it's not just simply the strong exploiting the weak. It's also people rising up and the hope and struggle for a better, a more just world.
Yeah, that's. I'm so glad you brought that up. I do remember that in that story towards the end, and I won't say who's saying it, but there is a character who is basically discussing how the whole world is nothing but a series of exploitations, and everyone is exploit. And he then goes from humans all the way down to the insect level, as with the examples, and in his righteousness that this what he's doing is correct because this is just the way of life and that's how it has to be. But also, so this exploitation, you're right, is probably the major theme when it comes to that. Colonialism is definitely there. We do get what you mentioned, the Maori tribe, which was this incredibly peaceful tribe. They never fought with anyone, and they get exploited by the Maori, and then everyone gets exploited when the white man arrives. So there are these levels, cascading levels of the exploitation seen throughout the story, and it goes on into the dystopian story in a major way, but all of them show it. Obviously, the corporate exploitation
Oh
with
yeah.
the story, and then even exploitation on a small level between one brother and another, maybe in the Cavendish, and how people. There's just
Yeah.
so many instances of it. Yeah,
And I didn't really talk about it, but in a nursing home where is presented kind of as a farcical comedy in a sense, but that character, Timothy Cavendish, is being exploited and victimized, not just by his brother, who is basically responsible for incarcerating him, but by the nurse in the nursing home, who is a kind of Nurse Ratched type figure.
Yeah.
And portrayed wonderfully, I think, in the movie by, was it Hugo Weaving?
I don't know,
I
but
can't remember. I think
yeah,
it's one of the male actors. And
yes,
I'll come back
definitely.
to that in a minute. But the other thing, of course, you mentioned the reincarnation of the soul.
Yeah.
This is made evident by the fact that each main character within each story has a birthmark that looks like a comet. I don't think this is a spoiler, because it's kind of it's not really a major detail. So everyone they had this comet, and this basically is to indicate that they are the same soul reborn in different ages. So it's quite an interesting idea. The film. Immediately after watching this book, I wanted to watch the movie. I was incredibly curious how this book could be adapted, because I thought that was going to be a challenge. Bart has also since watched the movie. What do you think?
The movie. Well, so first of all, the movie does not keep the structure of the book, and for a long time I was frustrated by that as I was watching it, and it's a fairly long movie. By the end, I think I was fine. I enjoyed it. I thought it was good, but it felt like, so in this movie, when you watch the movie Cloud Atlas, we do get all the six stories, but it's kind of haphazard in the way that the cuts are made. So we go from one to the other very quickly, and then back, and then to a fifth story. So I think it all comes together well, but I wonder if that was necessary. I wonder if keeping to the structure of the book, how would the movie feel? And to me, it would be better. All these shifts from one storyline to another felt a little bit too abrupt to me. So, but maybe that's just me not knowing, how the finished product would have been if they, kept to the structure of the book, and told, each story halfway, ending it. I don't know. I was wondering about the reason for that, because obviously, Cloud Atlas, the book, I think that that structure, that framing, is a huge part of the experience, and they threw that out by just going very quickly with shifts, and maybe some like 3 minutes, and then you go into the next story, and then back 5 minutes of that story, and then you're in another one, and then you're coming back, looping back. So I think it was effective in the end, and I didn't mind it. But yeah, that's one thing that stood out to me. But overall, I thought it was well done. I wonder if it couldn't be improved on, because I think technology has changed so much that even a movie that was done, I don't know how many years ago, I think 12 years ago, maybe this movie comes out. Do you remember?
2012 it came out, I think.
20, yeah, so a little bit more. There were some things with makeup that would pull me out of the story, where it just looked a little bit, people looked a little bit strange. But overall, I enjoyed the movie, and it was a great way to think about the book also, and to see some of the things that I was trying to imagine on a screen, and especially again the last story, where Tom Hanks is playing the tribesman. He's really telling this. It seems like he's telling this whole story. In fact, he starts off with the movie, beautiful scene in the beginning of the movie, and yep, it was well done, good acting. I thought I like the book more than the movie myself, but the movie, I think, got silly in some instances, and the scenes of action, especially the things that are happening in the Louisa Ray mystery, not everything worked for me in that one. Yeah, I don't know.
Yes, I think I'm agree with you for the most part. Yeah, I think I agree. The change in structure wasn't particularly to my liking. I didn't like the constant flicking
Yep.
between six stories. I think you might be able to achieve that in a film which has two or three different narratives. But when you've got six, even if it's a lengthy film, it ends up feeling kind of rushed. I think it would have been interesting to see what they would have done if they tried to taken the book structure. I think I would have preferred something which is a little more slow and thoughtful in each story. I think that might do the stories more justice. Maybe the movie's not the right format for that. Maybe like a 6-part miniseries would be something better, or 12-part. I don't know. But it's still, I did enjoy the film overall. I do think it was a great achievement for what they did. The film takes the reincarnation concept to a whole new level, because while it's only really kind of touched on in the book, I mentioned the birthmark, in the film, you've got the same actors taking on numerous roles throughout different stories, not just the protagonists, but supporting characters. And so you've got Tom Hanks, we mentioned, who plays the main guy in the post-apocalyptic story, but he's in, I think, every single story in a different role. And you've got a few other actors and actresses as well. Sometimes they even switch race or gender. So that was an interesting idea. That's an ambitious idea. I'm not sure if it always comes across very well. So, for example, in the Sunmi section, which is set in Korea, you've got various white actors portraying Asian characters.
Yeah.
Like Hugo Weaving, for example. And the makeup, I don't think, is very convincing. In fact, it's kind of cringy.
Yep, I agree.
It's basically yellow face. I mean, some of the makeup is incredible. You've got, for example, Halle Berry playing the wife of that composer. She's basically playing a white woman.
That was strange.
Yes, and I didn't even know that until the credits came up. But I was thinking, okay, this is a very interesting and ambitious project they took on, but is it really necessary? Do they really need to go to all this effort to make this point about reincarnation? So I enjoyed it, but I would have liked to seen it. So the actual stories themselves, the way that they unfold, is quite faithful to the book. But I think I would have preferred more of a straight up adaptation in terms of the structure. But still, it's an entertaining watch for sure.
And I love your idea. I love your idea of a mini or a series, like limited series, whatever. Like you said, 12 episodes, each episode being, one half of each story, with the sixth one be having 2 episodes back to back and then going back. I think that would be amazing. I think it's a great idea. I would love to see that. I think
it could really do justice to the book.
Exactly. Yeah. And especially with technology now, I think some of the faults, the cringy moments with the makeup, some of the special effects maybe not being up to par, even just, 13, 14 years ago. Yeah, I think could be improved. So like if Apple has done a lot of good science fiction shows, if they took on something like this, I think I would be super excited to watch it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've been discussing for almost an hour, and I'm sure there's a lot more we could discuss. And I think we've done a good job of kind of avoiding spoilers here. But I will just say, overall, I really enjoyed this book. It's one of the most ambitious and unique novels that I've ever read. I think it's the only thing I've read by David Mitchell, but I can see that he's a very talented and versatile writer from this book. So I might need to explore more of his work. And I know that Bart has read 1 or 2 of his other books. What else have you read by him?
This was my third Dave Mitchell. The first one I read, and it's one that I would recommend to you because it, again, has the science fiction element as well. And that's Bone Clocks, or The Bone Clocks, by David Mitchell. A fantastic story, beautifully written also, great character development. This one was a lot of fun. It's got a feel of a little bit of a fantasy also. It's a mix of genres, again, with lots of literary flair. I mean, he's got great prose. I think that's unquestionable, with great use of similes and metaphors and aphorisms. It's packed with things like that, and then there's also interesting action, drama. So it was a great introduction to David Mitchell, The Bone Clocks. I've also read Slate House, which is, if someone is interested in picking up David Mitchell, seeing if his writing works. This is a much shorter, because Bone Clocks, it's more closely align as far as page count with Cloud Atlas. This is a very short book. It kind of feels like it's in the same world as Bone Clocks. So a bit of like this has really no science fiction elements, where Bone Clocks has some future elements that kind of put it firmly in science fiction. This one doesn't have any sci-fi elements, but it's a shorter book if someone wants to read it. And then I just picked this one up maybe a few days ago, The Thousand Autumns of Jacob de Zoe by David Mitchell. And this one I don't know a whole lot about, except that I believe it takes place in Japan. And David Mitchell himself lived in Japan for, I believe, like 8 or 9 years. He was there. Right. His wife, I believe, is Japanese. So I don't know if he met her or if she's just Japanese British. I'm just talking. But I know he did live there for a long time in Japan. And this book, I imagine, is probably amazing as well. I'd love to, read Mitchell's descriptions of Japan. But yeah, I just picked this up. I would probably read anything and everything that he has written, because I can count on the prose being fantastic, and that will pull you through any read, even if the storytelling or the storyline is not as gripping. You can count on fabulous prose with Mitchell. 3 books in, that's how I think of him. He's a genius when it comes to he just makes it look so easy, effortless.
Yeah, he certainly does. So yeah, I think we both enjoyed the book. We can both recommend it. Do you think this book will end up in your top 10 reads for 2026?
So I'm having a really good year. I don't know. I'm very careful with how I pick my books, and I have quite a few books that I've rated a 5-star. I'm generous for sure. Some booktubers maybe would be a little bit tougher on some of the books, but it's a 5-star read for me, and I do think it's the type of book that is going to linger with me because of so many things that we've already talked about. I'm not gonna start again, and I do think it's very likely that it's going to be in my top 5. It is right now, definitely. And who knows? It's still 7 months of reading left, and I'm hoping that it gets bumped, because that would mean I'm going to read some incredible books. But I do think this is so ambitious, and I enjoy reading books that are interesting. But a book being just fun and entertaining is not my primary, objective or my primary marker when I'm choosing, these best books of the year. So I do think this is going to be there.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm still processing this book, right? I certainly enjoyed it. I'm not quite sure if it's like one of my favorite reads of the year yet or not, but the fact that I'm thinking about it a lot, after a couple of weeks after I finished reading it, suggests that yes, it is one of those books which stays with you, and I can definitely recommend it. And
we've read a few that had that effect. You mentioned Canticle for Leibowitz, but also Inverted World, just books that that you remember the reading experience, and this one is that type of book. So yeah,
and I can recommend this one if you are taking part in a buddy read like we have done, or if you're in a book club. I think this would be a great choice. There's a lot to talk about. I mean, we didn't really get into spoilers, but you could spend a whole evening just discussing this book with your friends. So
I agree, and it's worth saying that even though I think we were both quite positive on it, it's not the type of book that I would rush out and recommend to everyone, because I do think it isn't necessarily for everyone, and it isn't for every mood. I could see myself if I didn't know what I was getting myself into, I did. But if I didn't, maybe I would not enjoy this. This isn't a beach read. We have summer is around the corner. This is not a beach read type of book.
No, it is a bit of a commitment. It's like over 500 pages, and maybe not all of the stories will click with you. But yeah. I think, well, I mean, it's still got quite a good average score on Goodreads. And yeah, I would recommend giving it a try for most people.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're going to leave it there. So if you made it this far into the video, thank you. And if you're not already subscribed to Bart's channel, I'll leave a link in the description. Check it out, and I'll see you again soon. See you later.
Thanks. Bye bye.